Transition to college and career information for your next steps. This is a free educational webinar held on Wednesday, April 27th at 6:30. Our guest presenter is Adam from Landmark College. As I mentioned earlier, he has many different titles, being the Vice President of Resource and Innovations, Director of Landmark College Institution for Research and Training, Co-Director of Landmark College Center of Neurodiversity. Here is our disclaimer. The ARC of Lehigh and Northampton County Advocacy Department does not employ lawyers nor provide legal advice. This training or any other provided by the ARC's Advocacy Department does not constitute or imply the endorsement, recommendation, or favoring of the providing party or any employees or contractors acting on its behalf. This webinar is being provided for educational and informative purposes only. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our guest presenter. So Adam, as I mentioned, has many titles. I will not repeat them all because there's a good amount. He has more than 15 years of experience in higher education administrative. His research focuses on transition of students with disabilities to higher education and career. He has been published in many different journals and books as well, which I will send in our follow-up email. And he received his doctorate degree in education from Connecticut's School of Education, where he focused on post-secondary transition for individuals with disabilities. Thank you, and the Zoom is yours, Adam.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. I know those titles are a mouthful, so thank you so again for having me here today. It's this is really a passion topic for me. Transition, I mean, as Kodi was just saying, really is the area that I focus on day in and day out, in addition to my other responsibilities at Landmark College. And folks aren't familiar with Landmark College. Landmark College is one of two institutions in the United States that offers college programs for students with, solely for students with learning disabilities, ADHD, and autism. So I certainly love working with students with disabilities, and I'm really excited to talk with you today about transition to college and career information for your next step. As any good educator, I always like to start with a brief agenda of the things that I'll cover in this presentation. I'll introduce myself a little bit more. We'll then talk about, transition to college and career broadly. We'll then move into talking about some of the legal coverage and the differences between secondary and college and career. We'll then talk about three pieces of information that are particularly important: self-determination, self-disclosure, and self-advocacy. I'll round out talking about some resources that are available both in college and career, and then finally finish with just a couple of tips that I like to provide folks. And as always, I'll finish with question and answer. But I always like to talk a little bit about who am I. I was the interim vice president. Now I'm just the vice president of research and innovation. And in that role, I work with staff at Landmark College to really do research and training about all things related to neurodiversity. Neurodiversity being just the broad spectrum of how our brains in our society work. And we particularly focus on a neurodivergent part of that neurodiversity segment: individuals with learning disabilities, ADHD, and autism. I also have the honor of co-directing our Center for Neurodiversity. Unlike our research and training division, the Center for Neurodiversity is a culture and advocacy center. So we do a lot of programming trying to raise awareness of neurodiversity at large, understanding identity and identity formation amongst neurodivergent people, and also helping to advocate on behalf and with individuals who are neurodivergent. As Kodi said, I'm an educational psychologist, and really did my training focused really squarely on college and career transition. I've worked both with folks on the sending side, so secondary institutions, public agencies, as well as the receiving end, folks in the college or in the workplace environment. I serve on a number of different committees and in different leadership roles with LDA, the Learning Disabilities Association of America. I head the Association on Higher Education and Disability, and the Council for Exceptional Children's Division on Career Development and Transition. Most importantly, probably my most important role is that I'm the parent of two neurodivergent children, two boys who both are dyslexic, and one also has ADHD, and I'm also the spouse of a neurodivergent professional. I myself identify as neurodivergent and disabled. So it's not only do I work, live this life in my personal life, but I also do this as a career. So I get to see both sides of that coin. So a note about language. I mean, language is really important, and I want to make sure as I move into this presentation, I talk about my own language use. I first want to start by saying words have power and connotations, and I recognize this. I mean, the words we use in day-to-day society, whether it's about neurodiversity, disability, race, gender, they all have meaning, and they also all imply different things depending on the context and the social settings. So the words I use here in this presentation are intentionally chosen. And most of that, or the large reason for that, is because I want to be respectful. And in terms of respect, it's important to know that disabled people vary extensively in how they view disability and the language they prefer. I mean, we're not a monolithic group where everyone has the same opinion, even though sometimes the literature and television and books suggest we are quite different. I mean, as such, we all don't, we're not all in tune or agree with the language use around disability and neurodivergence. So, I mean, I always suggest when talking to an individual, if having to reference a disability, I always ask about the language of that individual person prefers. However, I mean, in this setting where I'm talking to a variety of folks, I tend to use the language that I prefer. And frankly, I don't have a personal preference. I certainly appreciate what my community, the disability community, has done to protect my rights and fight for my rights and those of the community. So I do use the term disabled. That there are disability rights, civil rights leaders really fought hard to get that word disability included in different laws so that we would have civil rights protections. So I don't shy away from that word because I know how hard it was for folks to fight for. However, with that, I recognize that I am more than my disability. That's one aspect and facet of who I am. So I don't always use the term disability. I'll use different terms. And that's because disability is a significant part of me, and that I don't really divorce from me. I don't say all the time that I'm with a disability. It's not like my dog, but it's very much part of me. So at the end of the day, I use person first and identity first language, and you'll hear that throughout the presentation. And it's not that I'm flip-flopping. It's that I'm trying to be respectful of different people, and personally, I don't have much of a preference in this area. Call me whatever you have it, but just call me nicely and respectfully. So with that, I'm just going to dive into a transition to college and career. And there are many things that are important to know about transition. And the first is that we've been transitioning throughout our entire lives. Transition is just a movement, a movement from one place, stage, or position to another. We moved from the womb out into the world. That was a transition, definitely. We moved into education. Maybe daycare first. We moved from grade to grade. My children just came back from school. They moved from an educational setting to a home life setting. So transition is just a natural part of who we are. And frankly, it's an unavoidable part of our life because we constantly get doing it. When you move from room to room, you're transitioning to different temperatures, you're transitioning to different people in the room, you're transitioning to different lighting. So, transition is an unavoidable part of life. In secondary education, however, when we talk about transition, it generally means the movement and associated preparation to post-school life. And there are a lot of different things that that we are being prepared to transition to in post-secondary or in secondary education. The first being independent living. That's an important thing for us to understand. If anyone has been, or if you're as old as me, maybe you probably had things like home economics and other life skills courses, health education, and things of that nature. And really what those are, they're preparing you for the next step. Within special education, we go a little bit deeper and talk about other types of independent living because oftentimes and historically, many of the students that we've had in special education have not been given the opportunities to live independently. I think about the folks that I work with who have mental health disabilities, schizophrenia, have a whole host of other identities. Unfortunately, as recently as the 80s and 90s, they were oftentimes these folks were locked away in institutions. So they really weren't given the opportunity to live independently. So special education and high schools really are having more of a focus on trying to support this really important life transition. Another thing that's prepared for in the transition process of secondary education is post-secondary education or post-secondary training. I'll be perfectly honest with you. While I work at a college, I recognize that college isn't right for every individual. And that's okay. People have different interests, they have different desires. And I have one friend that I grew up with that his goal was to simply be an entertainer. He had no interest in going on to get classically trained in theater. He wanted to entertain in any way he could. So for him, education wasn't the right thing. However, he did want to get some training. He wanted to know how different people trained their voices so they could take different parts. He wanted to know what are some different skills associated with, he was interested in lighting, so lighting design in theater. So there are different opportunities. It's not always that post-secondary education means college or formal education. Really what's important for us in secondary education is that our students want to continue learning in whatever way that is. If that means they want to continue their learning in life through college, that's a wonderful option. If they want to do that by going to the local library and reading, that's another wonderful option. Going to museums, taking courses, certificate courses and other certification. That's perfectly fine. Don't think that in secondary schools are only targeting the education in terms of higher education. I'll be talking about that in today's presentation in particular, but know that there are a lot of other educational opportunities. The most important thing is that people don't stop learning. I had a grandfather who once said to me, the moment you start dying in life is the moment you stop learning. If there's nothing else to learn, that means that you've seen it all and you're ready to go. So keep learning and keep growing. And then the final thing is career. preparation for career, whether it's a specific vocation or developing transferable skills in the workplace. That's the final thing that that secondary education is trying to transition you to. So, continuing with that, students with disabilities, frankly, often struggle with transition. This is important to know, and I'm not trying to scare any parents in any way, but it is a reality. It's something that we have to be aware of, so that we can take the steps to best prepare our children, our students, the people that we work with, that we care about, that have disabilities, for and provide them with the best chance at success. I'm going to give some statistics here. These are a bit dated, but really from the best source of information we have, the National Longitudinal Transition Study 2. So roughly 60% of disabled high school graduates pursue post-secondary education within 8 years of graduating, which sounds like a great number, and it is, because it's much higher than it used to be. But unfortunately, disabled students are still lagging behind their non-disabled peers. So there's still more work to be done, but certainly opportunities for post-secondary education at colleges and universities are increasing exponentially over the last several decades. The challenging part is, while folks have, so students with disabilities have been going into higher education at higher rates, the graduation rates are still relatively low. Of students with disabilities, 25 to 45, and it depends on the disability itself that the student has, only 25 to 45% graduate. And across the board, that of the non-disabled population is closer to 50. So there's a substantial difference between different types of disabilities. We know that students with specific learning disabilities tend to have slightly higher rates of graduation. Students who are deaf or hard of hearing tend to have slightly lower, as do autistic students. So there is certainly fluctuation there. Similarly, 60% of disabled high school graduates are employed within 8 years. That's compared to roughly 66% of non-disabled population. And I can tell you for a fact that this has improved dramatically over the decades. Now, there's certainly been, during COVID, there were certainly struggles in that area. The percentages have changed drastically, but that's across the board. That's for both disabled and non-disabled people. So I'm hoping that in the next couple of years, we get back to a rate for all of society that's better than it is currently. And then, it's also important to know that in terms of career, graduates with disabilities are more likely to A, earn lower wages, B, be underemployed, and C, have less flexible schedules. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this. What do I mean? Wages is pretty clear, earning less money. But in terms of being underemployed, there's a difference between unemployed and underemployed. Certainly, individuals with disabilities, as shown in the statistics above, are unemployed at higher rates than their non-disabled peers. However, they're also underemployed. And by underemployed, what that means is that A, they might not have as many hours that they're working. They may be working part-time, but desire to work full-time. They may be in an industry that they're not interested in, or have more skills than are being used, or have more training that are being used in their current employment. So there's a variety of different things, and even you can include in that not being given opportunities in employment, even if they are employed. And less flexible schedules seems like it's not as big a deal. But when you're thinking individuals with disabilities, oftentimes, well, this statistic includes individuals that might have medical health related impairments, may require meetings with counselors, may have reactions to medications, may have different types of disabilities that are not constant, maybe more momentary, sort of like migraines and things of that nature, which will flare up. And because of their schedules, they can be, those less flexible schedules, it can oftentimes cause issues for those students. But that doesn't get at the root of why transition is so challenging for our students. So why is that? And I have a whole host of reasons here. Certainly it's a change in environment. It's a change of systems that they have to get used to. Oftentimes it's more challenging because they may be in a workplace environment and they have fewer modifications to the work that they're doing. It might be because the work is just, sort of, if you're talking about education, it's just a higher level of rigor. They lost or changed their social groups. They have so much more independence than they may have had in secondary education. And now they have increased responsibility, less time that's structured for them. They have to structure their own time, whether in college or career. There may be more financial expenditures. When you go to secondary education or K-12, they're transporting you. If you're going to college or career, you're, generally the one in charge of, getting yourself to and from, and that might cost money. Transportation, is the next one. Transportation, it can be a major factor in whether or not folks are able to get to college or to career and then back to their home. They might have a new boss, a new faculty member that they have to meet, get to know, and who has to get to know them. Sometimes also family struggles with the transition. Family members might be anxious. They might be afraid, understandably. It's for some students that are now going off to college or career, it's one of those things where they've never had such a degree of independence before. And that can be hard for the caretakers who have spent so much of their life making sure they're advocated for, making sure they get what they need to be successful. It can be a scary proposition. It's a scary proposition for all parents, but it certainly can be heightened for parents of children with disabilities. And then there are a whole host of reasons why transition for your graduates can be a challenge. One big reason, frankly, is the change in legal status. I'm not a lawyer, but I do know quite a bit about the changing legal status of people with disabilities from the time they're in secondary school to when they're in college or career. So in a K-12 education, students are covered by three laws. And the first is the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA. And along with that is the Rehabilitation Act. Both those laws are civil rights laws. They ensure access, they ensure equity, they ensure that people will not be discriminated against based on the fact that they have a disability or are perceived to have a disability. There's also one additional law that individuals have in K-12 education, and that's the one in red. That's the Individuals with Disabilities Act, or IDEA. And IDEA, unlike the other two in that box, is an education law. The other two, remember, are civil rights laws. Now, the thing about IDEA is that it guarantees that individuals in K-12 education will not only be given access, but they'll be provided with the ability to be successful and to be proficient in different academic, social endeavors. Now, there's a lot that comes with IDEA. I mean, IEPs are come with it. I mean, all those things. I mean, there's a team of support around the student, but unfortunately, I mean, for students and parents, IDEA ends at either graduation or when a student ages out of secondary education. At those points, upon receipt of a diploma, upon the point of age out, students are no longer covered by IDEA. They immediately, within a blink of an eye, only are covered by the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, and the Rehabilitation Act. And those two laws cover individuals with disabilities in college and career. Now, you notice that some of those two laws, and the students were covered by in K-12 education. But I mean, we have to remember those are civil rights laws. All they guarantee are that people will be provided with access to education, access to the workplace, access to buildings and community-based activities. It does not guarantee, they do not guarantee success. They do not guarantee proficiency. So there's a big change that occurs there. And it's amazing. It's within the blink of an eye. I mean, some of those guarantees for success are gone. So, man, unfortunately, and that results in part of these non-completion rates that result in increased opportunities for job loss and things of that nature, because the courses in college, the work responsibilities, are not being modified. People will have access to do the work, but no guarantee of success will be there. So this is a really detailed table, but I want to try to provide show some of these differences in the legal coverage a little bit more. So, I mean, we talked really about the first two, and who's covered by the law under IDEA, infants through high school, infants through high school graduates or through age 21, which is age out. Under the ADA in Section 504 in higher education and career, it's really all people with documented disabilities meeting eligibility criteria for admission or employment who self-disclose and follow requisite policies at the institution for disclosure and providing information of a documented disability. Big difference there. Who has the responsibility for identifying and evaluating students with disabilities? In K-12 education, it's the school, but in higher education and career, it really is the individual. The individual is the one that has to disclose, that they have to realize they have a disability, disclose the disability, and make sure they have the appropriate documentation to essentially substantiate the disability. What is offered to a student with a disability? In K-12, it's special education, accommodations, modification, individualized education plans, and in higher education and career, it's reasonable accommodations. And reasonable is an important word. it doesn't mean that you can get any accommodation. It has to be reasonable and in a way that doesn't sacrifice the core elements of the education. So, for example, if someone is going to nursing school, most people would say, yeah, a key part of that is that the nursing student is able to take someone's blood pressure or pulse within a certain amount of time to make sure they're not dead. However, that process in K-12 education may have been given, the student may have had extended time, or time and a half, double time. Whereas in higher education, that would not be a reasonable accommodation because it's a fundamental modification to the goal of the education. So it's a little bit, it really has to be looked at very carefully to determine what is reasonable and what is not. Who serves as the primary advocate in K-12 education? That's generally speaking, the parents, and then sometimes the students themselves and educators. But in college and career, it really is the individual with a disability themselves. They have to advocate based on their own needs, with knowledge about themselves, in order to get the reasonable accommodations. Who's responsible for monitoring progress, outcomes, and achievement? Again, in K-12, it's the school, but in college and career, it's the individual themselves. And then the big one is, what is considered success? In K-12, it's proficiency, but in higher education and career, it's really, success is, did you have access, and was discrimination prevented for you? That is what success for folks look like related to disability in higher education and career. So big changes. So I talked a little bit about disclosure, but I'm going to go as well, but I'm going to go into a little bit more about self-determination, self-disclosure, and self-advocacy. And under ADA in the Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, disabled people are afforded the opportunity to make choices and determine for themselves, and not have determined for them, whether they need to pursue accommodations for access. Essentially, in college and career, there is no such thing as a child find where the responsibility is on the K-12 school to identify people with disabilities. That doesn't exist in college and career. Also, FERPA, or the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, ADA, and state laws protect disability-related information from being shared without express consent of the individual with a disability. So the individual themselves determine who has access to their disability-related information, and that includes parents. An individual with a disability who's in college, an education that a parent might be paying for, do not have access to any of the disability related records or information that a college has or a career has. There is a big line drawn there that you have to receive consent from the individual at the college or in the workplace to get that information. And part of that is self-determination, really, and the ability to make decisions for yourself is equated to dignity and respect for that individual. Just as, as adults, we wouldn't want our private information shared with other people, even if they care about us. We don't want people just giving away our social security number, our bank account information, our health records. Upon graduation and aging out of K-12 education, our children, our students, the folks that we care about, also receive that same dignity and respect of power over their own lives. So, but there's something interesting to know about self-disclosure. And self-disclosure, we're talking about telling other people that you have a disability. And the interesting part is most people with disabilities don't self-disclose. Many former special education students, frankly, believe they no longer have a disability after graduating or aging out of high school. They equate to disability, as being part of special education, K-12 education. And just looking at two profiles that I work with a lot, 69% of students with learning disabilities do not disclose a disability once they get to college. 24% of students with autism don't disclose. So these are pretty big numbers, even though they may have had special education and accommodations and modifications in K-12. They're not pursuing them, and they don't disclose once they move on. And students, and frankly, people in employment often lack an understanding of their own disability diagnosis. Time and time again, I work with individuals with disabilities who've never seen their documentation. They've never seen their evaluations by psychologists, or if they have a medical related disability, a health impairment, they haven't seen those medical records. Many never even are given the opportunity to know what their disability diagnosis is. I've had students that I've worked with before that have come to me specifically because they have a learning disability, and they've never been told that they have a learning disability. So it's an important thing to understand that not everybody is at the same point. And because of that, that also lends to the reason why a lot of new college students or new employees don't disclose for accommodations. We know that most don't disclose, and there's a variety of different reasons. One is, again, they don't believe that they have a disability any longer, but there are also things related to stigma. Feeling like you're going to be discriminated against, what people might think of you as an individual with a disability. Will they think that you're lesser? And there's also, frankly, a desire to be normal. For many folks who have disabilities, oftentimes that equated to either being pulled out of the classroom at regular intervals, not being given opportunities to take different courses because you had to focus in more on the things that you struggled with. It also means that you had to spend a lot of time, oftentimes focusing on the things you dislike most about school, whether it's reading, math, learning how to socialize with other people, etc. Or you had to spend a lot of time, because of health reasons, being out of school. So for many, it's just, I want to be quote unquote normal. I don't want to disclose because that says, once again, that I'm not normal. So that's an honest feeling that many of these students and employees have. I should also say that not all students or employees need accommodations when they go to college or go to career. For example, if you have a student who graduates from high school and they had dyscalculia, which is a math-related disability, and they go into a profession that's become a cartoonist, well, they might not need accommodations anymore because they're not doing the math. So sometimes accommodations may not be necessary as well. In terms of self-advocacy, it really is the hallmark of both self-determination and self-disclosure. And really what self-advocacy is, it's the ability to speak up for oneself. And it really is critical to accessing any type of accommodations in college or career. But it's also, a key skill in being successful, being able to tell folks that a faculty member or a boss that, I'm not understanding this. I need a little bit more explanation of this assignment, or, you know, I experienced this form of discrimination and it's not right. I need something done about it. Or, you know what? It's even things like, my office is freezing. I need the temperature to be adjusted. This ability to self-advocate for yourself is really critical in any adult environment. And for that reason, it has to be something that we are practicing and training our students to engage in. I mean, we have to remember, again, in K-12 and oftentimes at home, things are just provided for students, or for our children, no questions asked. It gets cold out, it gets to be the winter time, a parent pulls out a blanket and puts it on their child's bed. If they're hungry, we might give them we might just provide them with a snack. And a big one in college is if they don't have clean clothes, well, the college isn't going to clean those clothes for them. They'll have to do it themselves. But at home, oftentimes it's the parents who are taking care of that laundry. So the ability to, advocate for yourself, know what you need, be able to engage, ask for help if you don't know how to do something, if you don't know how to do your laundry, well, no one's going to do it for you. In order to get it done, you need to self-advocate and say, I need help figuring this out. So self-advocacy is a major tool. And there are 3 components of self-advocacy that are really key to know about. The first is know yourself. Individuals with disabilities need to know themselves and to be able to advocate for their needs. What are their preferences? What are they asking for? If you're thirsty, it's important to know what your preferences are. Do you want a glass of water? Do you want a glass of soda? Or do you want something else? So know what your preferences, and being able to ask for them specifically is important. Also knowing your strengths and areas of challenge. What are they? We all have them. It's folks without disabilities have them as well. So having an awareness about, what are the things that you really are strong at? Where are the skills that you have and the competencies? And what are the areas that you have challenges in it? That's not to say that you'll never get better at them, or that they'll one day won't become strengths. But what are those challenges currently? Thinking in the moment, because a lot of our students, especially students with disabilities and cognitive disabilities, they might have a challenge, but they also oftentimes have the ability to grow and to learn and to develop skills and to develop strategies. So while it might be a challenge now, it might not be as much of a challenge later on. And they also have to know their responsibilities. What are their responsibilities to self and to their community, to their family? And part of self-advocacy is understanding all of that. The second component is for students to know their rights. What are the laws? What are the laws that govern them, the disability within higher education career? How are they different from secondary education? What are the policies of their college or their workplace? Again, as part of accessing accommodations, and you have to self-disclose, and you also have to follow the policies and procedures for disclosure. That's really important. It's also important to know, what are your rights to the resources and supports? Different workplaces, as well as different colleges, have different resources and supports. Everyone with a disability also has federal supports that they can access. So what are these things? Know what they are. And finally, know how to get your needs met. And a lot of this is skills-based in here. How to be assertive, how to persuade something, to get something. Persuasion is sometimes necessary. Well, you might be legally entitled to access, it doesn't mean that that's always going to be provided. It's particularly in situations where people are ignorant of their responsibilities under the law. So persuasion can sometimes be a necessary skill to really get your needs met. Listening, that's another piece. I mean, it's oftentimes we think, when we need to get our needs met, it's just about speaking. But sometimes it's also about listening to what is available, listening to what the options are, listening for the process, to understand the processes and procedures for getting what you need. So listening is an important skill that oftentimes we don't hone as much as we should. And negotiation and compromise, it's another a real skill. Oftentimes, and I've been guilty about this myself, I've started with what I desire most and what I like most rather than what I need most. So a want versus a need. So sometimes, I mean, you have to be able to negotiate to get more, or compromise to get what you need. So those are all skills that we really need to begin practicing and working on with our children, with our clients, our students, etc. Have someone, I mean, if your child wants something, and they want a lot, they want a whole bag of cheese doodles. Well, that's probably not going to happen from any parent that I know. But so let's think about how you might be able to, how can the student negotiate with you, or the child negotiate with you to get something, and then ultimately compromise on how much. Well, they get the cheese doodles, but it's only a small, it's only a handful, or it's only a bowl full rather than the entire bag. So working on those skills in low stakes situations will help when it becomes much higher stake things in college and career. So I'm going to move on to a little bit of resources in higher education. There are a variety of resources that exist in a lot in both higher education and in the career environment. And there are a couple of different resources in higher education, and I put them into two classes: universally available services and disability or accessibility services. Now, universally available services are services that are available to any student on a college campus. It's not just for people with disabilities. It's available to everyone. Things like academic support centers, tutoring, writing centers, advising. Those are all services that any student, including students with disabilities, can access. And they're excellent. I mean, they can oftentimes be very helpful. And one of the nice things about it is you don't ever have to disclose a disability to access the universally available services. And I mean, just by nature of going into one of them, people don't know that you have a disability unless it's a visible disability. Now, I mean, if the disability accessibility services, I mean, those are the groups on college campuses that really provide, serve individuals with disabilities. They are the ones that make that work to secure accommodations for students that need access needs met. And disability services or accessibility services are required to offer accommodations for students who meet certain parameters. Now, what that means is that they have to meet them. They don't have to exceed them. They might be minimal accommodations, the basic things that you need to achieve access. Many institutions will go beyond that and provide meet preference needs and related to accommodations, that to meet the need, interests and desires of the student, but not all. For example, if a student says, I need this brand of assistive technology, and the college says, well, we don't have that brand, we have this brand. That is enough as long as it's providing the access. It doesn't have to be someone's first choice. Now, with that said, I mean, disability services offices will oftentimes go beyond accommodations and provide other services. And coaching, executive function coaching, or ADHD coaching might be something that's offered. Strategy instruction, how to learn different strategies, test taking, studying, math strategies, reading strategies. Social pragmatics programs might be to help students who struggle in the area of socialization and making friends. Might be an opportunity for them to develop skills in that area if they want to. Mentoring programs, meet with other individuals with disabilities who've done it before, if you're a first-year student, maybe pairing you up with a junior who's has a couple of years under their belt, and can talk to them about, it's not always easy, but you can get here too. Disability orientation programs, more and more colleges are offering opportunities for students with disabilities to come together before the start of the school year to learn more about the services that are offered at the college for students with disabilities. And finally, some institutions offer disability-specific tutoring. Tutoring in a subject area, for example, tutoring in calculus, but with someone who understands disability, understands dyscalculia, or tutoring in English by someone who understands dysgraphia or dyslexia, or tutoring in theater with someone who understands autism and how some of that social communication and voice modulation might be a little challenging. So lots of different services available. And I should say that both of these are excellent predictors of college success. Students who do these things, if they have a disability, if they do them both, have a greater chance of being successful in college than those who don't. And for a lot of students who don't choose to disclose in higher education, just knowing that universally available services, participating in those increased chances of success can make a big difference. Someone may refuse to go to disability services, and if that's the case, I'd encourage them to, but even if they refuse and say absolutely not, I would then turn around and say, well, if you're not going to do that, really you have to do these. Make sure to increase your chances of success. In terms of resources and career, they're not as robust. I'll be perfectly honest with that. Human resources is a big one. That's really generally where individuals are going to request accommodations and get any type of evaluation. Sometimes it's evaluation for ergonomics. If they have some type of orthopedic disability, it might be something to get the right equipment in the workplace to make sure that they can function. For example, autistic employees, you might be changing out light fixtures to have different degrees of filters or different wavelengths of light. It might be about accessing headphones in the workplace, etc. But human resources is going to be the place that generally makes those determinations about what accommodations are reasonable in that environment. Employee resource groups, and this is wonderful, and I'm so excited that these are increasing. But employee resource groups focused on disability and sometimes neurodiversity are popping up at organizations and companies around the country and around the world. They can be a really good place if someone's company has them, to really engage in a community that will be supportive of a disability. I always encourage folks that are going out into the workplace to get a sense of what the various ERGs are, to determine if there might be one that would be supportive and improve the climate for individuals with disabilities in the workplace. I should also say there are a lot of organizations that are developing programs to truly support and encourage applications from people with disabilities. Most organizations at this point have statements about equal opportunity in the application and hiring process. But a small but growing number also have disability focused programs. There's the Autism at Work movement, Neurodiversity in the Workplace, all groups that are supporting companies like Dell and Microsoft and JP Morgan, Ernst & Young, to really develop programs that will provide a supportive climate for individuals with disabilities. Vocational rehabilitation, and I'm going to be perfectly frank, vocational rehabilitation varies greatly from state to state. I've worked with some great voc rehab groups and some less than wonderful voc rehab groups. I've known several VR folks in Pennsylvania. I've always had good luck with them, but it just takes one to make it difficult. But I would always encourage folks to reach out to vocational rehabilitation and really get a sense of how they might be able to support them in the work environment. And there's just a quick link to Pennsylvania's voc rehab group. And then there's also the Job Accommodation Network, or JAN. JAN is another one-stop shop. It's based out of Tennessee. It's a nonprofit that will provide guidance to individuals with disabilities in the workplace or looking for jobs. It also provides support for managers and supervisors of individuals with disabilities who might want to do a better job. Provides support for HR groups or offices who really want to make sure that they're doing right by their employees with disabilities. So really a good number of resources here, and there's their link as well. So a couple of, as I sort of head towards the finish of the presentation, here are some tips for preparing for transition. As I said, really practice those self-advocacy skills at home. High school and even younger are really good times to practice those skills, so that by the time a child or a student gets to college or career, they've done it before. It's not something that they're learning as they need them. It's been practiced proactively. Develop strategies and skills in executive function areas. So what is executive function? So it's sort of those higher order processes like planning, time management, staying focused, things like working through distraction, trying to suppress any distracting stimuli, like a lot of our students who have the opportunity in college or career to play on their phone. How do they work to develop strategies not to do that? Know the specific resources of the college or workplace. So if a student is looking at a college or looking at a potential place to work, really looking at what the resources are available at those particular organizations. They're going to vary from organization to organization, college to college, workplace to workplace. So really investigating and doing your homework on the services and resources that are available will be important. Plan out for any health needs before arriving. Um, this is a big one. Whether you're going to work in a new environment or going to college, um, what do you need to be happy, healthy, and healthy? I mean, those are the a bit folks may have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but at the base level of that is health and safety. I mean, you have to be healthy in order to, I mean, grow, learn, work, do all those other things. If not, it's going to be a challenge, and success is less likely. So, I mean, if a student's going away to college, and knowing where the health services are in the area, if they need counseling or need a particular type of therapist, making plans for those before someone gets to the environment. The worst thing that can happen is that you go somewhere and you find out right away that you need a service, but you don't have anything ready. Um, I mean, transitions, as I said, are challenging. And the initial period of that transition, first arrival, those first couple months, tend to be the most difficult. That's when a lot of people have mental health challenges and that anxiety and depression pop up. That's when people realize that they didn't transfer their medication over to their new address, and they need a doctor right away to support them. All those different things are critical for to plan transition. I always, for everyone, whether or not they have a disability, I always encourage them to get a counselor, someone that they can talk to throughout this experience. That's not mom and dad. That's not grandma, grandpa. That's not brother or sister. Someone that they can be completely honest with. One of the great things nowadays is that, particularly if you're staying in your state, the opportunity to do telecounseling. It's a relationship you can establish early on and take with you to college or career. I mean, as long as you're staying in the same state or the counselor has a license in those states. And then this one, I can't stress enough. Things don't always go right. I mean, they're saying it's the best plans of mice and men often go astray, and that means that stuff happens. It doesn't. I mean, even if you think one thing is going to happen, something else might. So proactively developing contingency plans is helpful. So I mean, I think of a student in college or someone who just went away, may move somewhere new for work. What happens if their car gets a flat and they can't get there? Well, thinking through what are my other options? What are my contingency plans in that setting, in that situation? Another thing might be, well, you know, I forgot my laptop or some piece of equipment at home when I got to work or school. Well, what's the contingency plan in that situation? What do I do to make sure that I can move forward? I mean, do I have to ask someone to borrow something? Do I have to have a separate device, one for home, one for the workplace? I mean, to make sure, because I find that I'm forgetful. So different contingencies in place can really help in the long term reduce stress and panic. And then here are just some final thoughts. The transition to college and career often brings up mixed emotions. I mean, sometimes they're positive, sometimes they're negative, but most of the times they're somewhere in between. And that's okay. So I mean, here's some advice for that. Prepare. Get home life in order, start healthy, know about the college or the organization. If you can get, I mean, again, get to that base Maslow's level hierarchy of needs. What are the basic things that people need to in order to be healthy, safe, and secure in their new environment, and get those in place first. Identify and use available support resources. Knowing what's available and then using them in situations can be helpful. I mean, if you're anxious in college, well, what are your resources and how do you use them? If you're anxious in the workplace, who are the people you can go to, and how do you get support? The first year is usually the most challenging. Oftentimes people leave the first year because they feel it's challenging, and they just feel like every day they're just trying to keep their heads above water. Frankly, that's normal because you're transitioning to a new place, and it takes an entire year to really see how everything is done from start to finish. So I always encourage new employees or new students to really stick with it. Use your support networks. It's as important that you get through it as it is important for you to do well. So just keep pushing forward. And I always let them know that the second year is usually easier than the first one. So with that, I mean, that's the end of the presentation. I mean, it's very important for me to take any questions that you have, but I am going to stop sharing so that I can see folks.
Awesome. Thank you so much for this presentation. It was great.